Man and Monster Meet by Eric Tamburino, a new collection of fairy tales. Story 6, as read by kensvocals. Where Man and Monster Meet. The truth is, I am not a writer. I am just a man who has a hard time dealing with reality. Someone once told me, writing is like bearing your soul for all to see. If that is true, then I guess I have a need to bear mine. The rain began to tap dance on my office window as a storm brewed in the distance. The humidity of the summer night had given birth to the beads of sweat which clung to me like leeches. I sat in my office, wanting nothing more than the sweet escape of a peaceful sleep. I closed my eyes, listening. The rain had begun to fall heavily and methodically. I confess, I was thinking about her again. I watched as the memories began passing through my mind like tiny ghost ships, haunting me. In all of my work, I wished for nothing more than to create something beautiful, to weave those words into something beautiful. Perhaps that is the problem. Perhaps there is no beauty in my soul to give life to these words. Perhaps, after years of chipping away at it and surrendering its tiny fragile pieces, I no longer have a soul. That would explain why I feel something is missing, why, in a world obsessed with the value of things, I feel so unforgivably valueless. A storm had begun to rage, not only outside my office, but also somewhere in the depths of my being. There is a curse that comes with writing. It's like watching 1,000 romances, knowing you'll never fall in love. I see things, I feel things, vivid experiences that are not actually happening. They are not real, and they never will be. My paper lay bare in front of me, a painful reminder I needed to bear myself once more. One more story, I thought. One more story is all I wish to tell. I set my pen to paper and suddenly became overwhelmed with the eerie sense I was not alone. I turned from my desk to behold a figure of a woman standing in the center of the room. A soft glow of light encompassed her beautiful form, and her feet hovered ever so slightly off the floor. Just as in a dream when you cannot see a person's face, yet you know who they are, I cannot remember her exact detail, but I swear it looked like her. "Who are you?" I asked, oddly at peace with the presence of this stranger. Then again there was something about her that was so familiar. The spectre laughed, a beautiful musical laugh, and I answered in a gentle voice, "I was sent to be your guide." The wind began to pick up, and the storm began even more violent. "You must follow the star," she whispered. Then I heard it clear as the thoughts in my mind. "Wait," I called, over the crashing of the thunder. "What is your name? What star?" But the room began to fade into blackness, and so did she. I felt my mind begin to slip away. Then my office, the light, and the spectre were gone. There was only darkness, and I heard one word: chastity. I awoke on the ground in a dark forest, her name upon my lips. Chastity. As I rolled from my stomach to my back, a groan escaped me. My vision reeled, and the world swirled around me like the white spaces of a peppermint. I looked up at the few stars watching me through the canopy of trees. Follow the star. I blinked and watched as the world went from still to spinning again, like the slow start of an old merry-go-round. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath before opening them again. Again, the merry-go-round effect. I could not help but laugh for the moment at the stupidity of this situation. One moment I am in my office, the next I am on the ground, either drunk or sedated, looking up at the stars, reflecting on the words of a figment of my imagination. Or was she? This had to be a dream. Or maybe my office was the dream, and now I had woken up. With great effort, I rolled to my side and pushed myself to my feet, leaning on a nearby tree for support. I had awoken on a gravel path encased by thick pines on either side. Both directions seemed to stretch on for miles, and my options were limited, forward or backward. I chose to move forward, or at least what I perceived as forward. I walked slowly as the ground seemed to sway beneath me, like treetops in the wind, or perhaps ships at sea. I found myself stumbling a great deal, and even considered crawling on my hands and knees to ease the sensation. It is impossible to say how long I continued on this way. I do not recall it being long or short. I simply remember waking up, choosing a direction, and hearing the first growl. It was not the type of growl a man would make when angry, or what comes to mind when you imagine a rabid dog. It was a type of growl a monster makes in nightmares. I turned to look down the path and saw a figure, small, far off in the distance, but it was coming, and it was coming fast. I ran, or rather I tried to run. I admit I stumbled and tumbled and crashed through the brush and bramble, the nightmarish creature in pursuit. I fell through the edge of the wood and rolled down the side of a hill into a clearing. Flat on my stomach in the grass, I looked up and saw the creature that had been pursuing me. He stepped through the edge of the wood, bending a tree back as he did so. It was a giant. The ground trembled as he walked towards me. Then a shadow fell over me, but not one cast by the giant. I turned to see another figure. He wore a long black robe, with his hood pulled up, and his face shielded in shadow. The edges of his being seemed to move subtly, like licks of fire, dancing and disappearing into the air. He brandished a long sickle, holding it just above my fallen form, keeping the giant at bay. "Back," the figure demanded. His voice emanated from the faceless hollow of his hood like a mist, resonating with power. The giant snarled, but did not advance. "You cannot take my life," the giant said in his low voice. "Back," the hooded figure repeated. Each word he spoke seemed to linger. The giant crouched low until he was sure he could see him clearly. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. "No," I answered. A hideous smile twisted across his face, and his left eye rolled lazily to one side. "Run, run, little sheep." He sang the words as if they were a lullaby, and I were his child. Fear wrapped around me like a blanket, and the giant laughed a terrible laugh. I covered my ears and hid my face in the grass. It had to be a dream, and it had to stop. Then he was gone. Though my ears were covered, I could still hear the cold, misty voice of the hooded figure when he spoke to me. "Rise," he said. I tried to stand, but stumbled. After a moment, I tried again, and this time kept myself upright. The figure turned, motioning for me to follow. He moved away from the wood and began to descend down the hill into the dark valley. The valley stretched for quite a ways, but in the distance, the silhouette of a city could be seen. I looked up to the sky and saw a star burning brighter than the rest. The hooded figure walked towards it. "Follow the star." I began to follow. As we passed deeper through the valley, the air began to grow very cold. I watched as the grass died beneath my companion's robe, leaving a small trail behind us. "You are Death," I said, after some time. The hood nodded. "Who is the giant?" I asked. "Great Wolf," the answer came, long and drawn out. I did not understand his answer at the time, but there was much I did not understand. "Will he come after us?" I asked, staring at the trail of dead grass unintentionally. I caught the end of the hood shaking no before he answered, "You." I understood his meaning. We would not see the giant again. I would. "Where are we going?" I asked. The figure did not speak, but merely pointed to the star. "Thank you," I said, "for saving me." He did not acknowledge this. Instead, he asked only one question. "No fear?" "You have no fear of me," is what he meant. "This is not our first walk together," I answered. Again he nodded. understanding. As we walked through the valley, I began to regain control of my faculties, and by the time we reached the gates of the city, I found myself feeling more lost than disorientated. I looked for a sign to learn the name of our location, but could not find one. I shall simply refer to this as the Nameless City. Death entered first, and I followed. The Nameless City was unlike any city I had ever seen before or have ever seen since. There stood buildings and houses, tall and ornate. It had become a melting pot of what must have been thousands of cultures, all coexisting together, subtly influencing each other, and yet retaining their individuality. But the most impressive part was the streets. I looked down at the shiny path beneath my feet. The roads had somehow been paved with silver. I froze for a moment in awe. Then I reached down and I touched it. "You there!" someone called, and I turned to see 3 figures running towards me. I wish I could describe them, but indistinguishable is honestly the most accurate thing I could say. They all wore gray robes with their hoods raised, their faces covered with plain white theater masks. The only unique characteristic about them were the tools they brought with them. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you by yelling," the one with the pick began. "It's fine," I answered. "What do you think you were doing?" the one with the shovel asked, approaching with another who carried a rake. "No offense," he added. "None taken," I answered, confused. "We are not from these parts," I said, motioning to Death, whom they didn't seem to care about or even notice. "Did we do something wrong?" They looked back and forth at each other for a moment, seemingly bewildered, before the one with the pick responded, "By the order of His Majesty the King, Tabula Rasa, no one is allowed to walk on the old roads. No offense," he stated. "Why?" I asked. All 3 of them stood silent, almost as if expectant of something, before one with the pick answered again. "Because they are old," he replied, drawing out the word the way a child might call someone a loser on the playground. No offense. I looked down once more at the beautiful shining silver beneath my feet. "It doesn't look old," I stated. "In fact, it's rather beautiful." The one with the rake gave a dramatic gasp, while the one with the shovel clutched at his heart as if struck by an arrow. "Oh, calm down," the one with the pick said, looking at them both. "It's not from these parts. I'm sure it didn't mean any offense." He cleared his throat before turning back to me and adding, "No offense." The one with the shovel spoke next, answering my question. "The king said so," he blurted out, before adding with his authority, "and yes, we have been ordered to rip them up." He took a moment to point to their tools. "And you, he paused for a moment, a tone of frustration growing in his voice, "you are still using them." "You must get off," he explained, exasperated, before adding sheepishly, "No offense." "Where are the new roads?" I asked, and all 3 of them clutched at their hearts this time. "I'm sorry," I said. "Where should I walk?" The 3 of them pointed in unison in the direction from which they had come from. "You will find the end of the road in that direction," the one with the pick said. "The king has decided we no longer require roads in the city. I suggest you stop thinking of them altogether. No offense." I thanked them for their time and began walking in the direction they had pointed me. As I came to the end of the road, I saw that it did not simply end, but it had been shattered and the ground scraped raw. Almost half a foot lay down, nothing but dirt. The crew had been careful to remove even the tiniest fragments of the silver road. A wheelbarrow to my left had been loaded with the pieces for disposal. As I stepped off the silver and down onto the dirt, I heard a sudden, small applause. I turned to see the 3 masked figures watching and clapping for me. Then the one with the pick turned to his companions and said, "All right, back to work. No offense." And they continued to tear up the roads. Death and I continued along the dirt paths. It saddened me to see the silver road was not the only thing being uprooted. As we journeyed deeper through the city, I noticed that the buildings became simpler, very tall and completely stone. They looked like skyscrapers in our cities, but less attractive. I noticed several of the cloaked figures working to remove a statue, while still more were decommissioning and removing a foundation. I assume that someday the whole city will suffer a similar fate to that of the roads. The people of the city were neither rude nor polite. All were cloaked and masked. I saw no men or women, no child nor old, only the indistinct figures that resembled people. No one spoke to me, nor I to them. I followed close behind Death as he moved through the city with a perfected precision, not touching anyone. We came upon a port at what I assume was the far end of the city. It reached into the waters of a river, not a small wooden dock, but a large stone port for freight ships. Many merchants had set up shop there, and it had become somewhat of a small marketplace. Now this confused me, as I realized the port was empty of freighters or even small merchant vessels. In fact, not a single ship was docked there, or so I thought. Death led me to a small black skiff. It rode so low on the water it could barely be seen. Many turned to watch as I boarded after Death. Emotionless, eyeless masks turned in my direction. Death pushed us out into the river, using the staff of his sickle against the stone and then the water. I watched as the city faded into the distance, and for some time we were alone. I was 18 when I first encountered Death. He came and took my mother from me, which, as you can imagine, left a lasting impression. When the smoke and mirrors are taken away from the show of life, and the illusion of immortality is broken, we are left with the haunting question everyone asks, and only a few can answer. What does it all mean? And a clock, or rather a time bomb, in your mind begins to tick. I think that is why people write, to create something to leave behind, to show they were here, and possibly even that they mattered. This is one of the many beauties of stories. They can reach across time and resonate with others. I was once on a date with a young woman who had read a fraction of my work. She asked me what I liked to write about, and I surprised myself when I instinctively answered, pain. Pain is relatable, universal. Just like death, it surpasses race, religion, and sex. It unites people and also divides them beyond repair. The truth is, I really don't wish to write about pain, but rather I want to write about hope. Pain is just the medium. Pain is the dark etchings of a charcoal drawing, and hope is the blank spaces that add a sense of context. They reach out to the viewer and complete the picture. I would like to say that my journey down the river with Death was a pleasant trip, but the truth is it was not. Death stood behind me, pulling the boat with the rod of his sickle. I watched the forests on either side of us. It felt as though we were moving through a tunnel as the trees rose overhead. And reaching in towards us, I found looking into the water to be much more interesting. There I saw hundreds of people looking back at me. At first I believed that they were perhaps criminals who had drowned, but they moved beneath the surface as though they still had life. One of them looked up at me as we glided by on the surface. They all wore decorated masks. As we moved further along the river, the masks grew plainer, and eventually there were no masks at all. There were men and women, old and young, children in the river, all of them seemingly unaware of their location. Memories, I heard Death murmur behind me. Fear smothered me as I realized what he meant. These were the memories of those who had traveled down this river before me, starting with the most recent and returning generations. The further we traveled, hundreds, if not thousands of life journeys had been lived, now rested here, washed away from the minds of their owners. Will I forget too? I asked, not taking my eyes off the beautiful images beneath me. They flickered and swayed, with the light current of the water, yet their motions were deliberate. I began to feel a bit like I was watching an old movie on an old television, the picture slightly obscured and the color only a little less vibrant than the real world. I looked to Death when I heard no answer. The hood shook slowly back and forth. No, I would remember, though now I wish I had forgotten. My gaze turned to the waters, and I was stunned to find I recognized one of the people beneath the surface. "Mother!" I cried, but she did not hear. My hands plunged through the waters, reaching for her, but they grasped nothing. A small sliver of pain entered me as if I had been stung by a bee at the tip of each finger. "Mother!" I yelled again, reaching deeper this time. The boat rocked, and the waves splashed against my chest. I slid further and further out of the skiff. I could see her, and we were closer now. I reached for her a total of 3 times, but each time I was met with empty arms. The pain deepened and moved through my fingers, across my hands and up into my chest. It felt like electricity, energizing and incinerating. Hot tears burned down my face, not from the pain in my arms, but from the pain of the memories. I called to her once more, and for a moment she turned as if she had heard me. But that would have been impossible. The staff of Death's sickle scooped under me, crossing my chest, and pulled me violently back into the boat. "No," he commanded, pointing to the blunt end of his tool at my weeping form. I lay on the floor of the boat, memories now flooding my mind. The pain in my arms did not subside until we were almost all the way down the river. Once it did, I found myself listening to the rod of the sickle cutting gently through the water again. Death propelled the craft through the waters. We did not speak, nor did I look back into the river. When the boat stopped, I stepped onto a small stone pier which had connected to something I can only describe as an enchanted city. A light fog crept off the water, but the port was illuminated by the glow of thousands of tiny fireflies. I looked back when I noticed Death had not followed. "Are you coming?" I asked. The head shook. "How will I know the way?" He pointed up at the night sky, and I realized what he meant. The star, which shone brighter than the rest, hung almost directly above me now. I turned back towards Death and watched as he piloted the craft back the way he had come. The trees and the fog over the still water slowly swallowed the black hooded figure. "Thank you," I whispered, somehow certain he had heard me. I turned to the city gates that stood before me. The phrase, "The unexamined life is not worth living," had been carved into the archway. "Aristotle," I whispered. "Socrates, actually," I heard Chastity say as she appeared at my side, her feet hovering just above the cobblestone. "Chastity, where have you been?" I asked. "Where you had to go I am not permitted to enter," she said. "But I am with you now, and with you I shall remain." "Where are we?" I asked. "The city of fallen heroes," she answered, gesturing in the direction of the gates. We walked together, or rather I walked and she floated into the city. The city of fallen heroes looked just as you would expect. It was an ancient stone city that had begun to be overtaken by flowers, vines, and vegetation, and could have been mistaken for a mythical garden. There were pillars and archways, and steps that led to nowhere, or rather had once led somewhere, but no longer did. But the most captivating part were the statues. As if frozen in stone thousands of years ago, there stood hundreds upon hundreds of statues. I saw many I recognized and many I did not. There was a Roman man standing on a bridge, a young boy in full Spartan battle gear, and a man on a cross. The truth is, I always wanted to be a hero. I grew up reading countless tales of ancient myths and hundreds of comics with masked vigilantes. As I grew older, I found they were just that, stories, tools to teach children ideals. No one actually wore a mask and a cape, while making a final stand for humanity. Now we grow up and we realize the world is more complex than children's books, and we learn to become complex with it. As we walked through this grave of history, I found Chastity's presence quite comforting. Death had been a rather silent companion, and Chastity was as well. But there was something about the soft glow which emanated from her that seemed warm and peaceful. She stopped as we came to a new section of the city where the statues had been lined like a standing army awaiting their orders. "Who are they?" I asked. "They are the unrecognized," Chastity answered. "Fathers and mothers, friends and strangers. It would take decades to tell all of their stories." I remembered I had once worked in an office, and someone very high up in the company was coming to visit. I was told to have a question prepared for him, and when the time came, I asked him, "Who are your heroes?" The question reduced the man to tears. He told me he had recently lost both of his parents, and that they had been his hero. Heroism is not unattainable. It's just not always glamorous. Most of it is probably the internal struggle to stand by those ideals you were taught as a child. When you remove the veil of complexity from the world and from yourself and remember how simple it can be, right and wrong. I looked over the lines of statues, deeply moved, when an overwhelming desire to leave struck me. I felt common and out of place. "Come, we must go," Chastity said. We continued through the city, stopping here and there as I examined some of the statues and asked Chastity questions. The real answers of this journey did not come, though, until we came upon the tower. Somewhere in the city, a tower stands reaching, not just to the sky, but to the star that shines brighter than the rest. When we came upon it, I walked to the door at its base and lifted the latch. To my surprise, the door opened. I stepped inside and began to ascend the spiral stairs. Chastity did not follow. As I came to the last steps, I could see there was a room at the top of the tower. I entered as if out of the floor and stepped onto an old octagonal room, which had walls made of mirrors. It terrified me at first, as I did not see my reflection in any of them. "You have arrived," I heard above me, and I looked up to see Chastity reappear in the cone-shaped ceiling space just above the walls. She descended until her feet were just above the mirrors. "Where am I?" I asked her. "Where you need to be," she answered with a smile. A low rumbling of a growl caught my ears, and my eyes turned to the mirrors. I saw myself for the first time, and behind me I saw a wolf. This was not an ordinary wolf. It was old, sick, and evil. I spun around to defend myself and found myself face to face with the giant. He had caught up to me. Behind the giant in the mirror I saw no giant, but rather the wolf I had seen before. "What is this place?" I asked, my gaze moving from the giant to Chastity. "Do not be afraid," she said. "The giant before you is merely what he wants you to see. The mirror will show what really is." I looked back at the sickly creature in the mirror and then to the giant before me. Afraid, I turned my back to the giant, facing him in the mirror, feeling the room I saw in the mirror was more real than the room I was standing in. "Now it's your turn," I said, looking up to Chastity. "That is not how it works. But that you may understand." She distended only enough for the very tips of her toes to reflect in the mirror, and a blinding light, brighter than the sun, drove me to my knees. The wolf behind me yelped in pain. The light faded as Chastity returned to her place above us. A deep silence followed, and in the silence I realized why I was there. The sense of awe fell over me as the realization I had to look into the mirrors, not to see the wolf or Chastity, but to see me. A deep fear rose at the thought. Her beauty had been blinding. What hideous shape would I see of myself? I felt the hair on the back of my neck begin to stand on end before realizing it was not my hair, but fur gently brushing against me. "You don't have to," the wolf whispered. "Come with me, and I will keep you safe." And for a second I did feel safe. The consoling touch of the soft fur soothed me. I could leave and never return. I would never have to face the mirror again. "No," I whispered. I stared into the mirror, looking deep. At first I saw nothing. Then an image began to form. It was the image of a tired old man. He clutched a painting close to his heart. It depicted a woman of incredible beauty. I turned to the second mirrored wall and saw a creature with long black hair hung around a pale face with deep, pained eyes, almost as dark as the night sky. His scaled hands were tipped with the sharp nails, more like claws. In the third mirror, I saw a hybrid between a wolf and a man. And in the fourth stood a coward before an empty throne. The fifth revealed a man with a tattoo on his arm. It depicted a sword planted in the ground, a cape and helmet resting on top. The sixth mirror showed a young man in robes, holding dark magic in one hand and a strong light, like a flare, in the other. In the seventh stood an actor who clawed at his face, trying to remove a mask. In the eighth and last mirror, I saw myself. A priest had once told me to write letters to her, but not to send them, and so I did. It helped, and eventually I stopped writing to her, but I never stopped writing. A door had been thrown open, and a spring breeze had swept through the house, stirring up the dust and cutting through the sickening scent of depression and decay. I began to write frequently, story after story, trying to cope with more than just her. I wrote to cope with myself. People imagine the soul as an unseen heart, something which can be broken and crushed, but they are wrong. The soul is like blood. It moves through everything and gives life. It can bleed, and I have bled into my work. The artists, Jude, Daniel, Silas, Alexander, David, Matthias, I looked at them all, remembering every accident, mistake, cruel intention, and moment of surrender, every pain and every time I rose to something greater, every instance that inspired and shaped them into the creations they had become. Tiny mirrors of my sins and my successes, the hero and the villain, the man and the monster. This is it, I thought, staring into the mirrors. This is where man and monster meet. I looked to each of them one last time as they faded, and all that was left was myself. I do not know how long I have been sitting at my desk. I do not remember returning to my office or opening my eyes. I was just suddenly there again, staring blankly at my paper. I looked around, half expecting to see Chastity or the wolf, but they were both gone. I caught my own reflection in the glass cover of a picture that sits on my desk. I stared at it for a moment, remembering. Then I picked up my pen and began to write. The truth is, about the author. Eric Tamburino is an American author of short fairy tales. In early school years, he struggled, particularly with reading, but always found it easier to learn when information was presented in story form. He graduated with a bachelor's degree in communications and works as a marketing specialist. He hopes to work in film someday. He loves storytelling and continues to write, both to entertain and to teach. To contact him, where man and monster meet @gmail.com or at https://wheremanandmonstermeet.com. And acknowledgements. I would like to say thank you to a great many people who assisted me in the completion of this book, some of whom include Loretta C., Sarah L., Emma J., Tom P., Luke S., Chris L., my wife, and of course my father, mother, and sister. There are too many more to list, but please know that I am grateful. Thank you for the discussions, the editing, for believing in me, and for reminding me that this was worth doing. The end.